Three, two, one. What's going on, everyone? You're watching Ash on Comics. My name is Ash, and here's today's comic. Joining me, as always, is Stan the man, the myth, the legend. Wait, I always say the myth. You're not a myth, Stan. You're not a myth. But it's one of those weird, I just say it out of habit. But Forky, you might be a myth, right? You're completely animated. You don't really exist. But you're not trash. That's one thing for certain. Thanks for joining me. We're talking about Powers of X, number 4, in case you can't see the number. Can they make it any smaller? This is my favorite cover. In fact, it's my least favorite cover so far. Stay bright. Let's just get right into it. This was a tough book to digest, if you will. It starts off, I fear our needs will far outlast our desires. We have many hard choices ahead of us. Professor X. And then we get the big 2-page spread of credits, as usual. I'm not going to comment on this anymore. I've said it, my piece. And then we open up on X0. So this is Powers of 10. I sometimes say Powers of X, forgive me if I do. And that's just the way that it is. And let's turn off these notifications so they're not popping up in the middle of the video. X0 is the starting point, X to the power of 0. So it's essentially year 1. And then we see this island, which is called Bar Sinister. And we see 2 strangers showing up. You can kind of recognize who they are. Halt, strangers. State your business. But please, God, don't ask for help or a handout because, while yes, we have much, we really can't stand to be bothered with the sad problems of sad people. And oh, look, you're wearing a cape. How perfect. I'm guessing you don't have an appointment because who wears that, having the other? Charles responds, we don't have an appointment, but it's important that we see Nathaniel Essex. Then he pulls off his helmet. Which one? There are so many of us. Magneto responds, we'll settle for the one in charge. The one in charge. Well, aren't you something? Yes, the outfit's ridiculous, but you do have an air about you. There's no denying that. Your friend, however. This just won't do. It will not play well at court. A sad little man in his sad peasant suit, stuck in his sad little chair. And then Magneto's just had enough, and he's just like, thunk! Eric, we need this man. No, Charles. This man needs to decide if he wants to escort us inside, or if he wants to continue thusly and suffer the consequences. So Magneto's not messing around. 2 minutes later, Mr. Sinister, the previous Sinister bows, I present you the mutants Magneto and Professor Charles Xavier. All right, so at this point, I'm not going to read any more, but you can see there's this weird sort of, I don't know. This kind of remind me of, if you ever seen like Flash Gordon, Emperor Ming had this sort of like weirdness to his whole court, and he was just kind of this eccentric. Like this is even more a whole new level. Now, Mr. Sinister is a character I've always liked, because he's got a really cool villain name and he looks really freaking cool. But I've also had this problem with liking him because I never thought he had a really cool story about him. Like he was just sort of there. Like this villain that's like, oh, he's got these weird secret motives and he's messing with mutant DNA, which that's interesting. And he was making the clones and had the whole Madeline Pryor thing, and then originally he sort of seemed to come out of, with this whole Inferno, and there was all the demon stuff. And I was like, oh, okay, he's sort of like this demonic villain is how I interpreted him when I was young. But then later on, they sort of went away from that, and he's just this sort of crazy, kooky scientist guy who messes with genetics. And I was like, I never really understood his backstory as like a person. So I never could connect with him on a character level. And so here we get this story, and it's a very different Sinister than I'm used to. He's very eccentric and weird, and he's got surrounded himself with all these clones of himself, And we're not even sure if he's the real one. He has a bit of a part where he's like, what? I love that cape. Amazing. Why do I not have a cape? How do I not have a cape? It's a crime, sir, an outrage. Honestly, I've always thought you should wear one. Well, if you really thought that, why didn't you say something? It slipped my mind. Execute this man. And it's kind of funny, but it's like weird. It feels kind of out of place. And then all of a sudden, these other guys, I'm presuming are Sinisters, just chop him into pieces like instantly. And then what's really weird, he just goes back to, now, how can I help you? And Charles doesn't even blink an eye. Now remember, Charles Xavier is a pacifist. Yes, we're probably going to be facing a different Charles. Those phone calls. As I was saying, yes, this is a more determined Charles Xavier than we've ever seen before. It's going to break the mold a little bit. I'm expecting that. But deep in his core, Charles is a pacifist. He's the yin-yang to Magneto. Magneto is the aggressor. He's the guy that we must destroy our enemies before they destroy us. And Charles is the, no, we must teach them the way so that they must learn we can all accept and belong. That's been the big deal. Now, this Charles, those type of people, they abhor violence. Like if you saw this in reality, this would just be horrifying. For him to keep his composure like this and not even just be like, whoa, what's, it just felt weird to me. Just as like how he just completely neutral to people just being slaughtered and ripped to shreds in the most violent manner. And here it's done in the shadows even because it keeps the gore to a minimum. I don't know. I guess I'm nitpicking there. It threw me off. And that's kind of what I'm pointing out here. As you're reading a story, when things just like make you kind of stop and go, wait a second, that breaks that immersion, even if it's only for a split second. So Magneto reveals some of the secrets they know. They know about the library building. And Sinister, kind of explains to them, like, how do you know? And it's like, oh, we have our ways. And they're like, basically, we've seen the future. And this cause, mutantum, is yours. So Magneto, if we're to believe the narrator here, basically says the whole reason mutants exist is because of Sinister. And that's new. And that made me wrap my mind around. I was like, wait a second. So if Apocalypse is the first mutant, Apocalypse existed thousands of years ago, how did Sinister make mutantum? Unless there's something that happened before. Something that happened that allowed to go back in time and start this chain. Don't know. But he's just like, he's anti-mutant. And we find out that this Apocalypse or the Sinister they're talking to is not a mutant. And you're like, what? And he's like, I don't like the results. Da, da, da. Then all of a sudden, bam! He gets shot. And this guy's like, but I will. And he shows, and it's like, this is the Sinister we know. Look at that cool cape. The cool look. He's just got a gun. And at first I was like, oh, cool. That weird kooky Sinister has been replaced by this guy, the Sinister. But he's still got the weird kooky nature too. It's like, psst, it's me, the Sinister with the mutant gene. So this is the one that the other one was referring to, that he experimented with making mutant and didn't like it. But I guess he kept him alive. Well, it was kind of weird. So they make a deal with Sinister, and they say, look, we need you to do this thing. Keep doing what you're doing. We're not going to mess with you. But make mutants a priority, da-da-da-da-da. And then Charles Xavier does the little mind wipe thing, which is here again. This is Charles breaking the mold. This is something Charles would never have done before. And he programs his mind and says, first, you need to begin the good work. And then I need you to forget why you're doing it and that we were ever here until the day I tell you to remember. Oh. All right. And then we get the now infamous I'm going to call them the white pages. We get the white pages, and these are something new and different. The Red Diamond, all the best news and gossip from Bar Sinister. So obviously this place is a weirdo place that doesn't make sense in our reality because it's a bunch of crazy people, presumably because they're all clones. But they have this sort of little newspaper, whatever, and there's all these different secrets. Now, I haven't had time to really dive in and figure out some of these secrets because they're a little bit cryptic. Some are kind of obvious. Some not so. Let's see, like if I can point out one. Oh, this was kind of interesting here. Sinister secrets revealed. Certain people are wondering where the tyrant dispelling Sinister got his mutant gene. And while that really isn't an interesting story, whom the DNA originally belonged to is John Proudstar, a.k.a. Thunderbird. So you're like, oh, so Thunderbird has a bigger legacy now. That's interesting. On the second page, here we go. He's the best there is at what he does. So who's that? If you know X-Men, that's Wolverine. She's married with a kid. The husband knows exactly what's going on. But who is he to point the finger? He's up to much the same and more. Maybe just this is the new normal on the mutant island. So this is kind of like a gossip rag, right? So it's kind of cool that they hint at some of these things going on. So obviously that seems to me like Wolverine, Jean Grey, who he's always had this sort of like, this, I don't know, not a romance with, but, you know, she's been the bad boy that she's been attracted to. And, you know, they've kissed a couple times. The husband is Scott, presumably. Kid, would it be Nathan? Or there's a number of kids, right? There's Rachel. I can't remember which ones are kids of Madeline Pryor and which ones are kids of Jean Grey. But some of them I haven't figured out. Like I just read this book. So this is going to be fun talking with other fans and piecing together the clues because none of them are obvious. This one here is Sinister Secret 7. Two brothers jumped out of a plane. So if you remember the X-Men lore, that's the Summers brothers, right? That's why Scott can't control his vision. And for the longest time, until he was discovered, many wondered if there was a third. I still think that's dumb that there's a third brother, but Vulcan exists. And if we told you there were more, would you believe me? Probably not. So now you're like, oh no, here we go. So moving on. The X to the first power. So the X-Men months ago. We see Island of Krakoa. I'm not going to lie, Professor. I wish you told me that we were taking a vacation. I would have packed a bathing suit and probably some sunscreen. Oh, that the world would allow those like you and me some respite from the toils of everyday life, Douglas. I'm sorry to say, this is not a vacation. This is Krakoa. Now, Cypher is immediately apprehensive. Krakoa has been an enemy in the past, and that's been something that's been in the back of my mind since the beginning of reading the story. It's like, what if Krakoa is manipulating things all along? You know, when we saw the pod people in the very first issue, I was wondering, what if Krakoa is birthing these clones? Now that we have Sinister in the story, I'm wondering if those clones were Sinister clones. And so for the first time, we actually get to see the personage of Krakoa, where Charles takes Cypher to him. And we know from the first issue that Cypher had already translated. So this is a little bit of a prequel and how they got the introduction. And Cypher, interesting too here, this little bit here, they're walking through the forest. Now Cypher has been infected by the techno-organic virus. And he's touching the leaves and you're seeing them get infected with the techno-organic virus. And so that's like a subtle clue. And as our friend of the channel, Jimmy at Comics Quirks, not his real name, that's his nickname, Jimmy. He's Joshua. He's trying to throw off this nickname. Don't let it. Joshua. It's Jimmy. And why do you call him Jimmy? He's Superman's pal, Jimmy Olsen. He's Superman's pal. He loves Jimmy. So anyways, he's told me Hickman doesn't do anything without a reason. So this is obviously some sort of plan. And I love it. I love little things like that later on you'll come back to and be like, oh, damn. Yeah, you can see his arm here. So this is the part where they come up with the language and how to communicate. But what's interesting is you learn some history. Krakoa is not the only one. There was another one, Arakko, and they were two. They talk about the twilight sword of the enemy tore the world asunder, and what was one became two. Arakko and Krakoa. And from the chasm between them, from whatever wicked place they came, the enemy poured into this world. If not for the man who was not a man, the first mutant, the warrior god in blue, the world would have fallen. But using all his mighty powers, he stood in the gap, pushed Arakko through the chasm, set his four sentinels to sentinel that land, and sealed the chasm shut, never to be opened again. So here we get the original Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse. By the way, one of the rumors that I didn't read talks about the Four Horsemen as well. and the originals. It's some deep diving stuff here. It was a thing that had to happen, it was, but Krakoa remains alone, a half not whole, for now and forever. So some interesting world building and lore. Charles basically is like, I need you to set up to do all this stuff. How long is it going to take? And he's like, a year at the most, essentially. So he's like, here you go, get to it. And we get some more white pages, some interesting stuff about Krakoa, and Cypher sets up a system so that other mutants can communicate with Krakoa without having to use him. Because without Cypher, the only people that can communicate to it are Professor X telepathically and Cypher. But this is an interesting part in the thing. They talk about a fifth portion of the Krakoan, hierarchy. Note that while there's no actual evidence of a Krakoan skunkwork existing, there are rumors of a massive subterranean laboratory where Forge is busy building biological machines that could possibly be used to manage a mutant expansion on the island. Interesting. And then we fast forward to X to the Third, the X-Men, year 1000. This is the part of the books that have been the most confusing, this future scene. And we've been able to ascertain, for the most part, with pretty good certainty, that this future happens in Moira's 9th timeline. If you're like, what the heck? If you don't know what I'm talking about, you should stop watching this and go back. First of all, just read these books. Don't let these books be spoiled to you. There is so much good stuff here. The plot of these books is denser and more interesting than probably any comic on the shelves today. It's definitely worth your consumption. So I am the first of elders, and this, my seer self. We are ready for conversion. We hope for ascension. So we phalanx care little for for hope. Will you ascend? We have to try, don't we? Isn't that what's next? The idea of your great union existing just beyond our reach is something we cannot tolerate. Do it. So they reach out and grab the seer self thing, infect it with a techno-organic virus, and then it just... And they're like, oh, what's going on? Well, am I in there anywhere? Anywhere there in we phalanx am. And so he's just like, if so, then you'll know the sequence as I know the sequence, and between us, we, the only two. And he recites, there was a city on the mountain, and behind it the sun shone brightly, and then too brightly as it expanded to consume the city, the mountain, the world. And something starts happening. So it worked. Yes, it worked. The question remains, yes, do we find this form of conversion, acceptable? Or actually, yes, do you find this form of the conversion acceptable? And so the phalanx reforms into this thing. Await response, await answer. I don't understand what just happened. So this is for the audience benefit. So essentially, the phalanx are the precursors to this the highest alien race that dominates, controls the universe, blah, 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 blah. And the phalanx are sort of the heralds to that. And they're ones that prepare other societies for ascension to join that group or to be utterly eradicated. The thing is, they can't process biologicals. It's all mathematical intelligence. So what they did with that seer is this guy converted himself into an artificial intelligence. And that's how they can reach ascension, is presumably. So these beings cannot ascend this way. They have to convert, and they're going to die, essentially, is what it means. It's very convoluted. I'm not sure I can really explain it to you. I encourage you to read the book. And the idea is, so the one other person is like, so you're trying to trick them, because she thinks it's a trick. And then Nimrod says, it's foreboding, isn't it, librarian, that they want us and not you? Because he's, and that's what she says. So you're trying to trick them. No, I don't think there's any tricking them. We just hope we've found a way around the problem. Now we wait to see if it's acceptable. And then that's where it ends. I'm not afraid of what I've done, but I do fear what it will one day cost Professor X. And then we get the reading orders, and look, next week is another red stripe. We remember what happened with the first red stripe. That was the Moira reveal, big reveal. So I'm assuming this is going to be another big, just like mind blow reveal. I really look forward to it. This book, I will be honest, is near the bottom of all the issues so far as much as enjoyment, but it's still extremely interesting. I really enjoyed trying to process it and digest this world building. Mr. Sinister played off weird to me at first. I was like, what's this? This is Clown Sinister. But then I remembered this is a whole new lifetime. Remember, there's things happen differently in this, I'm assuming, Moira's 10th life. And that the Sinister we knew in the past wasn't a different. And so people develop differently and so forth. I don't know. Like I said, I was never tied down to Mr. Sinister's character. I just liked him as a villain. He was interesting, the things that he did. But his character itself, I wasn't really attached to. So I'm okay. I really have liked everything about this book. Going over it again with you guys on video like this has kind of reaffirmed what I first took in. The art is not as good as the House of X. Pepe Larraz does the House of X. I think this is R.J. Silva. But it's suitable. It's fine. The coloring is fantastic. And, you know, it appears that there might be something in the coloring itself of how the different timelines use different hues. So, you know, we have a lot more like red here, whereas you skip ahead into the next timeline and we have kind of a more warm oranges and yellows. And then you skip ahead into the future and it's more cool colors, blues and greens, purples. I'm wondering if that's some sort of hint that is happening. I also want to point out something that I haven't heard anyone point out yet. You're going to notice the lowercase text, which is the Ultimate Universe. Historically, that's what we're led to, you know, that's the Ultimate Universe used that. So a lot of people have speculated, oh, this story somehow is connected to the Ultimate Universe, da-da-da-da-da. It's all, but look at the phalanx, all caps. I don't know, I'm not, you know, trying to read anything, but is it possible Ascension could lead from one universe to another? I don't know, but it's something worth noting. It's the only time we've seen the traditional all caps from anyone speaking are the phalanx from Marvel 616, and this is Ultimate Universe. Am I reading too much into it? I don't know. But like Jimmy says at Comic Works, Hickman doesn't do anything without a plan. So I think it means something. I do. So I really enjoy this. Tell me what you guys think. This isn't the mind-blowing. Not every issue can be a home run, right? You got to have some lulls. You got to have some world building. You got to have some character development sometimes. And that's where you take an entire run all together and you put it together as a whole, how it works. I'm thoroughly impressed. Every issue I read, I'm just like, I'm waiting for the ball to drop. I'm waiting for Hickman to just be like, oh, you were liking this? Watch me just screw it all up and, you know, crap the bed and just be like, oh man, just when I thought X-Men was cool again, it turned into a shit show. I'm waiting. I'm waiting for that just because Marvel has burned me so much. Come on, really? You couldn't wait just one more minute? All right, so I got to get running. This video is probably already too long. I always try to make these short, but I can't. I just blab on and on and on and on. Hopefully you find some enjoyment out of that. Hopefully if you're reading the book, you just like hearing other people's perspectives on the book. If you're not reading the book, hopefully this is convincing you that you're missing out and you should try out. This is one of the most interesting, compelling, crunchiest plotline books you're going to read in modern comics today. Look at that badass picture of Apocalypse. All right, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.